Hi, this is Cal Ripken Jr., and you're listening to the ML Sports Platter.
The ML Sports Platter brought to you by our great friends at Bryant and Stratton College, Welch & Company Jewelers, and the Vince Aguirre Consulting Group. Log on to vcgtransforms.com today. vcgtransforms.com. Become a better leader both personally and professionally. Also, huge shout-out thank you to Syracuse Fitness Store. Just got my brand new Spirit XBU 55 bike at home. Can't wait to hop on that baby and pedal. Obviously, Syracuse Fitness Store in and around Central New York. Just the top-notch, best fitness equipment. They have free weights. They've got Stairmasters. You name it, they've got it at Syracuse Fitness Store right there on Erie Boulevard. And a quick tip of the cap thanks as well to Sit Means Sit Syracuse, #1 dog training. Get your free consultation today. SitMeansSit.com. Free consultation. Syracuse's best dog training in and around Central New York. Any dog, any breed, any behavior. Sit Means Sit Syracuse is a proud ML Sports Platter sponsor. Can't wait to talk with this next guest. He is a phenomenal reporter and insider covering the Minnesota Vikings and the NFC North at Purple Insider. You can go subscribe at purpleinsider.substack.com. Former 1500 ESPN reporter, just does amazing stuff. At Matthew Coller on Twitter, at Matthew, Coller. Matthew, this is a delight, man. How are you? And hey, you've been putting out some great stuff lately. I'm sure you're pumped up for some football.
Yeah, happy to be here. What's going on, man?
Well, let's get into it. I mean, I know you've been pumping out some unbelievable content lately, and I know you're on with Tyler and Jim of the gang from Go Long. I heard that spot. That was terrific. The Vikings, let's talk about that team and some NFC North here. What are the realistic expectations for this team this year, Minnesota?
Yeah, I think it's probably two different conversations. One is being very realistic, and the other is what Vikings fans want to see as realistic. And then there's what they need, really, for the organization and where they're at right now. So just starting with the first one, I think it's realistic to see this team as a little bit above 500. They've done a lot in the offseason to beef up their defense after a down year, and they've still got a lot of offensive weapons. But it's a little bit of a sum of the parts type of thing with this team where, they just have not over the last couple of years with Kirk Cousins gotten the most out of what they have in terms of star talent. And so I think if you're being very reasonable about that reality and how difficult it is to just overhaul and sign a bunch of people and then hope that they gel right away, I think that's very difficult too. Then you'd look at them as more of a mid-pack team. And that's kind of where Las Vegas looks at them as the 9 wins, I think, is their over-under. And then there's what Vikings fans, I think, want to view as reasonable expectations is that this team is a serious threat in the NFC. And I think that that's possible if Aaron Rodgers doesn't play. And I think that that's possible if every single bet that they made in the offseason all clicks. So all the players that they sign in the offseason, they all work out. We don't often see that, but it's possible. And then there's what they need, which I think is a really good year is what they need, because they have just been stuck in the 7-9 to 9-7, 10-6 type of area for the last couple of years with Kirk Cousins after they went all in and spent huge dollars on him. And, Mike Zimmer, every year of his coaching career here in Minnesota, except for one, has been that same sort of thing, somewhere between 7-9 and 10-6 or 11-5. So, I think that Vikings fans also are thinking, they want a little bit more than that, and ownership at this point has to be thinking that they want a little bit more than that for all that they've paid in free agency, all that they've paid to keep their stars, and all that they've paid to sign Kirk Cousins, that they want more than the one playoff win that they got out of Cousins. So I think that there's kind of this, best case scenario that they really need this year to happen.
Speaking of Cousins, I mean, they've got to be regretting that contract, right? And keeping him and giving him that monster deal.
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion because when they signed Kirk Cousins, I think everybody understood it. I think that there was a discussion to be had about how much you're paying and how difficult that is to keep a roster together when you pay that. But the general consensus was okay, if you can upgrade from Case Keenum in terms of talent to Kirk Cousins, who had come off two very good seasons in Washington in 2015 and 2016, and a little bit of a down year in 2017, but I don't think there was any question he was more talented, then the logic was, okay, you bring him into the existing roster, and then can, perform even better or be even stronger as a team. Or when, your defense does falter, you're going to have a guy who can keep you in a shootout and that kind of thing. And through the first 2 years, the first year it did not work out. It was a massive disappointment with an extremely talented team in 2018 to go 8-7-1. And then in 2019, they have a pretty favorable schedule and end up with the playoff win against New Orleans, but losing in San Francisco, that kind of felt like, okay, this move is not a success to sign Kirk Cousins when they lost in San Francisco. And I believe he threw for something like 170 yards. It just really was kind of a complete no-show from their entire offense. And that was what they had brought Cousins there for, was it if the opponent is difficult, that he can overcome it, unlike what they thought from Case Keenum. So, then last year the defense falls apart. That's going to carry most of the blame. But at the same time, Cousins was the league leader in interceptions for, I think, 6 weeks, and they were 1-5. And so it has not been a success. In no way, shape, or form has it been a success because of where the bar was set. But where I think you really go back and scratch your head is he gets the one playoff win in New Orleans, and then without even really much debate, the Vikings decide that they were going to extend that contract.
Right.
So they could have just said, okay, you know what, this hasn't really worked, and maybe we should try something else. Or maybe we should just let him go into the final year of his contract. They could have done that too. And instead, they desperately wanted to create some more cap space, so they redid his contract. And the general manager of the Vikings, Rick Spielman, said in a press conference, well, we had to extend him so we could sign Michael Pierce, who, by the way, didn't even play last year because he opted out, and is a nose tackle, as if like that was the only nose tackle in the world. So I think that they overestimated how long that window was going to be for them to be competitive when they signed Cousins, maybe, and they thought that last year was going to be another year to take a shot at the Super Bowl. And by Mike Zimmer's own admission, they miscalculated pretty badly on that. And that's the one that they probably regret. And that's why this year is kind of a make or break for this entire deal with Kirk Cousins. Because if they go 8-9 and they miss the playoffs or something, then this is one of the biggest bust signings relative to how much the team paid, I think, ever. If they go 13-4 and the team is great, then they make the playoffs, they go deep in the playoffs and reach an NFC Championship game, then it sort of justifies the whole deal of, like, this is where we saw this could go when we signed him. It just took a little longer to get there.
I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, Matthew, think that Minnesota has a roster top to bottom like Cleveland or like San Francisco. But I feel like they're in that category a little bit of, wow, we've got a pretty darn good defense. I know that they're not, the stars aren't on that roster. They don't, there's not a Bosa, there's not a, a Khalil Mack, there's not a superstar, Aaron Donald, but they play great team defense, and Mike Zimmer's a pretty darn good defensive coach. I think their defense is going to be pretty good this year, by the way. And then on offense, you've got a situation where you do have Dalvin Cook's one of the best running backs in football. I feel like every single time I look at the bottom of NFL Network with Red Zone, he's scoring again. Justin Jefferson obviously was immediately a stud out of LSU, the guy they basically replaced Stephon Diggs with. What I'm getting at is I like the roster. I think it's really good. I don't think it's quite Super Bowl top to bottom, but I feel like it is lumped in with Browns, Niners, and a couple other clubs in this league. Hey, nice roster. Pretty cool. You might make the playoffs, but man, that quarterback's going to kill you. I lump them in there like that. That's how I think of Minnesota every year.
Yeah, I think that also when you talk about the star talent that they have, you could probably match it up star for star, like how many star players you have, how many Pro Bowlers you have with a lot of other teams. But the thing about Kirk Cousins is that he's never going to elevate your team beyond whatever the roster is, like whatever the strength of the roster is. So when you go through and say, like, here's the Pro Bowl players that they have, they should be really great. But then there's the other part of it is the weaknesses of the roster, will hurt you just as much as those things will help you when you have Kirk Cousins, because he's not like a Russell Wilson when you have a poor offensive line where he's just going to run away from people and make plays anyway, because he's about the least mobile quarterback in the NFL. I think maybe Phillip Rivers retiring and Drew Brees retiring makes Kirk Cousins literally the least mobile quarterback in the NFL these days. Maybe Ben Roethlisberger, I don't know. But I remember looking at even Cousins' rushing yards, which I know is not like a perfect stat for mobility, but in realizing that Teddy Bridgewater in the last 3 years has more rushing yards than Kirk Cousins, and Bridgewater missed like full seasons and is not a running quarterback. So that just shows you how the element, like that element of athleticism, does not make up for anything. And so what I'm circling back to is the offensive line, and the fact that the Vikings have not had good offensive lines in the recent past, and it's really kind of taken apart Cousins when they play against good defensive lines. And this year they're relying on 2 rookies to start, which very well could work out. And that's what we talk about with making certain bets. Like, that could work out, and those 2 rookies could step up. It could also completely fall apart, and they could be a poor pass blocking team and have the same problems that they've always had on offense with Cousins. And on the defensive side, it's the same sort of conversation a little bit of like, Patrick Peterson is an all-pro and a Pro Bowler and a huge name in this league, but last year he did not play very well for Arizona, and 2 years ago he wasn't all that great either. So if we're talking about this late career Patrick Peterson, who is nowhere near what he used to be, that could just kind of take the thing apart. And that's the thing about this Vikings roster, is it feels very fragile, and it feels like these things all have to work out to be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. That I think Cousins is good enough at football as a quarterback to take you deep into the playoffs. It's just, if one thing does not stay in place or match up or click, then it's probably not going to happen with him.
We're talking Vikings and some NFC North here with Matthew Coller. Does a great job for Purple Insider. Go subscribe at purpleinsider.substack.com. He's on Twitter at Matthew Coller as well. Is it really right now for Viking fans? Is it, hey, we're pumped for football 2021? Is that the focus to figure out how good this team is? Or is the focus really in Motown, in Chi-Town, in the Windy City, in Minnesota? Is it all about what the hell is going to happen with Aaron Rodgers? I mean, is it more about Rodgers than the fan base's actual teams?
I mean, the Rodgers thing is huge here for sure. I mean, they have just gone to battle with Aaron Rodgers for so many years, and I'm sure that Vikings fans would prefer to not do that anymore. I mean, the Rodgers situation also seems to really carry what's going to happen in the NFC North. I mean, if Rodgers is playing, even if he isn't the MVP he was last year, you're probably still talking about a 12 or 13 win team in Green Bay, because they kept most of their roster. They've got one of the best receivers in the NFL. They've got a lot of great players on defense, and I think a very good offensive coach in Matt LaFleur. So the Vikings, I think even Vikings fans know they're not as strong as Green Bay if they have Rodgers. If they don't, and it's Jordan Love, it's always possible Jordan Love could be really good right away, but I don't think that's a likely scenario, that he's just fantastic right out of the gate. And so that, it's funny because that kind of would change even the expectations a little more if Rodgers does not play. It would be like, all right, well, all of your excuses are gone. Nobody's in your path here in the NFC. You go through the NFC, and I wrote a column about this the other day. There's question marks everywhere in the NFC, so go do it, kind of thing, if Rodgers isn't there. So that's absolutely a huge thing. But I think also everybody wants to just see this team in a preseason game. Last year we didn't have them, and you kind of didn't have that hype and that lead up and getting a look at all the new players on the roster. And that's, I think, also part of, the intrigue here is just how much they've overhauled that defense. It's really incredible. I mean, there's maybe 2 or 3 players that are going to start that were starting for them last year. That's how much they've overhauled it. So I think that's the other interesting storyline that Vikings fans care about.
The Lions, the Bear, I mean, we've already exhausted Rodgers. Basically everybody has at this point. It's just a waiting game. But like Lions, Bears, outlooks on those clubs, what do you have there? I'm actually pumped about Justin Fields. I think that could be a real good steal for those guys.
Yeah, it could be, and that would be another sort of classic Minnesota Vikings thing to not go their way, is that
Yeah,
they
right.
made a half-hearted effort to trade up to draft Justin Fields on draft night, and then your division opponent ends up having Justin Fields, and so that might be one they regret ultimately. That one is interesting because I think the Vikings fans aren't taking Chicago too seriously, but Chicago has been in the playoffs more in the last 3 years than the Vikings, and their quarterback was horrible. I mean, it's kind of, sort of tells you about how strong their defenses have been, and they also have a couple of weapons there, namely Allen Robinson, who have, at least dragged something out of their offenses recently. So I remember saying that you shouldn't even make fun of Andy Dalton if you're a Vikings fan, because he's better than what the Bears have had, and the Bears have been repeatedly knocking the Vikings out of the playoffs the last couple of seasons. So if Justin Fields is good, if he's good right away, that's going to be a huge problem for the Vikings. But even with quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks, even when they're good, usually they're not good enough to take their teams anywhere. It's a tough league. I mean, it's really tough to just step right in and be great. With Detroit, I've been debating this on the show with other guests of like, should we even talk about Detroit? Because they just seem like they're so far out of sight, out of mind. But there is, I guess, a world where Matt Patricia was so bad as a head coach that even though Detroit's roster isn't as good as it maybe was with Matt Stafford, they're just better because they have a head coach who knows what he's doing. So maybe I should do a Lions preview on my show, but I'm kind of saying like, all right, you're going to have to prove it to me, Lions. Your head coach said he was going to have his players bite kneecaps. So until you guys can show that you matter, I'm probably not going to acknowledge you.
Yeah, no doubt. Vikings insider Matthew Coller, I guess your Purple Insider at Matthew Coller on Twitter. I got one more on the football end, and then I wanted to kind of just chat about your media career a little, just to wrap up, because I know you have some Western New York ties as well. What else in the NFL are you pinned on here? Outside the division? Is it the league story with the COVID vaccinations? Are you keeping your eye on the Buffalo Bills because of your Western New York tie? Is it the Bucks and Chiefs trying to get back to the big dance? What do you have outside this division you cover so closely, and the Vikings specifically? What are you pinning your eyes on here going into this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't. I hope anyway that the whole vaccination thing does not end up being a persisting story through the entire season, and that we go through it without COVID being a problem. Now, that's very hopeful and optimistic of me, but I just don't want that to be a story all season long. It was painful last year. It was painful to cover games with no fans in the stadium. It was tough not being able to go in the locker room like I had before. I mean, it was rough. So hopefully we just move past that as we go through the year. But to me, it's the Los Angeles Rams that are the most interesting, and that I've spent a lot of time talking about, because in the NFC North, I've just seen Matthew Stafford time and time again disappoint despite his talent. And the Lions organization gets blamed. Their coaches get blamed. Their lack of a running game since Barry Sanders gets blamed, all these things. But, Stafford, I think, is, in my view, the most overrated quarterback in the NFL, because people think he's one of the elite quarterbacks in the game. And I think he takes a lot of sacks and he throws a lot of picks, and he has reasons why he hasn't won anything in Detroit. But can he go to Los Angeles with a great coach and great weapons and just prove me wrong? And I'm going to be very, very interested to see how that works out. And the other thing, too, staying in that same division, is Kyler Murray. I mean, Kyler Murray is reaching that point where we say, were you worth it as the number one pick or not? I mean, so far he's shown some flashes of that, but has certainly not elevated himself to an elite quarterback. And that team, they did a lot. I mean, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. They've brought in J.J. Watt. I mean, they are now kind of a ready-to-compete type of team. And those two teams are also on the Vikings schedule. So I'm watching them, very closely. And I think also the other team that intrigues me is actually New England, which may sound odd, but New England signed everybody they could get their hands on this offseason. And I also think that Cam Newton was playing pretty well until he got COVID last year, and then their roster fell apart. So I'll be interested to see if there's like something there, with the Patriots, because I don't think it's odd, but I don't think they're getting a whole lot of offseason buzz. But I always trust that Belichick's going to find a way to sort of bounce back.
Western New York ties. Tell my listeners about it, Matthew.
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up in the sort of between Rochester and Buffalo in a small town. I guess all of you guys know about the towns in between, basically. So, yeah, I mean, I grew up there and started my media career as an intern in Rochester and worked for WGR starting as a producer, WGR in Buffalo starting as a producer, and then moved up to an update anchor, and then moved up to, more of a host and Bills pre and post game and stuff like that. And then I moved to Minnesota to cover the Vikings in 2016.
Well, look, most of us, love Western New York and certainly the passion of Bills fans. Have you ever thought about what the heck would happen if they ever won a championship? What the heck would happen to that city?
Yeah, I mean, that it's the same sort of like, it was interesting that I went from Buffalo to Minnesota.
Same deal.
The correlation, of teams that have had so many legendary players throughout the years that just never gotten over that hump. And I think, what is there, like 12 teams that don't have a Super Bowl, and I went from one to another. So, I think that for the fans who have waited so long, it would be some kind of legendary celebration, especially in Buffalo. If you're a table maker, you're preparing, right? I mean, that's, but, that's what was interesting about last year is, they get so close and run into a great Kansas City team. And can they get back again, right? Usually, I saw this in Minnesota, usually if you have that great year where everything clicks for you, the next year it doesn't always happen. And I guess it's really on Josh Allen's shoulders to see if he can kind of repeat what he did last year. But to your point, yeah, I mean, just having been there and built, my media career through Buffalo, I understand that the passion of those fans is absolutely through the roof. I mean, I don't have to tell anybody what that's like. I don't think that it's like that throughout the entire country. And I think it is a special thing, and I would fear a little bit for the city. I think they would burn the thing to the ground.
I'm telling you, I mean, look, we'd all like to find out, because obviously that would mean that they would have a title, but good Lord, I agree with you. Covers the Vikings and the NFC North, of course, Purple Insider. Go subscribe at purpleinsider.substack.com, and he's on Twitter at Matthew Coller. And hey, by the way, grab his book. It's called Making of a Miracle, the story behind the Minnesota Vikings' improbable 2017 season. It's on Amazon.com, other online platforms where books are sold. Go pick that up right now online. Matthew, this was outstanding, man. Continued success sent your way, and hopefully we'll talk again real soon, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
ML Sports Platter brought to you by the Allen Angus Pub and Welch & Company Jewelers. And I got to tell you, I mean, I do like, I mean, going back to a few minutes ago when I brought up the roster of this football team, I like the Minnesota Vikings roster. I really do. I think Zimmer's a decent coach. I mean, I think he's just spearheaded towards the defensive side mostly. But I think he's a good, culture guy. I know that word. I know it gets thrown around so much, but he's a good team bonding guy, and he's a disciplined guy, and he teaches the fundamentals, and his teams are usually prepared, and and all that. And I mean, I think that their offensive line is fairly respectable as well. I don't think it's top 5 or 10 in the league, but I think it's decent. They've added to it as well. I mean, they went out and got a couple more guys in the draft to add to it. Defensively, they don't have stars who jump off the page, but they have a very good, team concept with guys, and they've sort of fit pieces in here and there. Look, you go out and you pick up some veteran players. You go out and get, Patrick Peterson. You mix and match with linebackers. They play a team fundamental defense. They tackle well, mostly. And then offensively, you've got Dalvin Cook, who's a top 5 running back. At times, he's the best running back in the league, period. Some might argue Ezekiel Elliott, some might argue when healthy, a Saquon Barkley. There's a lot of there's a lot of great running backs out there, but Dalvin Cook is just consistently one after another. Christian McCaffrey. I mean, there's a bunch of guys, but Dalvin Cook, like I said to Matthew, I mean, every single time I'm looking at the bottom line at NFL Network and the Red Zone or whatever, I'm checking Twitter, he's scoring again. Like fantasy people, there's a reason he gets taken real early, because he's a red zone monster, and he's picking up 1,000 whatever year. Derrick Henry's another running back, obviously. He's probably the best running back in the NFL. But Dalvin Cook ain't far behind. I mean, he's really good, and he's a top 5 guy. Their weapons. I mean, Justin Jefferson is a clear number 1 right out of the chute, from his rookie season. I've always been a big Adam Thielen fan. I mean, they've had, and even going back to Stephon Diggs when he was there. I mean, their roster has had plenty of playmakers, plenty of good defensive players, team-oriented, solid coaching. And I just stare right at the quarterback position. And I stare right at that salary. And I'm like, this Vikings team is held back by the position. They're held back by Kirk Cousins. There's no other way to say it. And, look, I know there's a lot of teams you can say that about in the NFL. I know you look around, and I mentioned the Browns. I mentioned the 49ers. You can absolutely positively look at those teams and say, a team I think's getting there, Washington. I mean, I like Washington's roster like a lot. They probably should have gone out and done more with the quarterback position in the draft. But you've got an all-time possibly here, defensive stalwart, a generational type player, rushing after the quarterback, a guy who, if he stays healthy, the guy's going to go straight to the Hall of Fame, and Chase Young. He's only been in the league, a couple of years now. You've got you've got guys on this roster. You got a dual threat at running back. You've got, solid speed guys at wide receiver, could do a little bit more, but, you get Curtis Samuel. You've got some solid players there. I don't think they're anywhere near the roster of Cleveland and San Fran, and frankly, I think they're probably behind Minnesota's a little bit too. But you get the point. They go out, well, let's go get Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's like, guys, you got to try to take more stabs at the quarterback position. There are a lot of teams, that are like that, where it's really complete, but, aren't the Tennessee Titans like that? I like Ryan Tannehill, but aren't they kind of like that? Indianapolis is hoping Carson Wentz can fill that void. Can he get us, with him and Frank Reich working together in Philadelphia? I mean, can we bring some of that magic here to Indianapolis? I mean, they've got a really good roster from top to bottom, offense, defense, special teams, well coached, obviously, except for the playoff game against Buffalo. Frank Reich is a pretty good, head coach. Denver, complete pretty much roster, playmakers, big time pass rushers, no quarterback. And I'm not saying it's easy to find them. I'm not. I get it. I'm a Bills fan. I'm really hoping Josh Allen, stays the course here. But there's a lot of teams, you got to at least try. You got to at least make an effort. And I think Minnesota, giving him, and Matthew described it perfectly, giving him that deal, that extension, what are you doing? No thought whatsoever. Just give it to him. I just don't get it. And now they're hamstrung. Because they can't get up over the hurdle. There are a lot of teams that can't get up over the hurdle because they don't have the guy to lead them in the right direction. They don't have the guy who's going to take them over the hump. I mean, Cleveland's telling me that Baker Mayfield is right, and he's telling you that he's the guy, he's the starter, right? We're told that, Trey Lance is this special diamond in the rough guy that perhaps could be the deal. They've already given up, I guess, on Jimmy Garoppolo. Is he going to get traded? I don't know. But again, there's one for you. Jimmy Garoppolo, he's had injury problems, but, would Jimmy Garoppolo be a better choice for a Washington or a Denver or someone like that. So I'm looking forward to, obviously, all things football, but I'm looking forward to this NFC North. Obviously, I'm tired of the Aaron Rodgers drama. Most people are just like, let's go one way or the other here at this point, but that's not how he rolls. But I'm intrigued by this division. I am. I want to see what Jared Goff does in Detroit. I'm intrigued that Justin Fields could be the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears. And, I've always kind of from afar, kind of hoped that all these teams really do well. Because this is a division I can relate to. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I can relate to the Vikings because they've lost 4 Super Bowls. I can relate to the Chicago Bears because, the Bills go back as an original AFL team. The Bears are original NFL team. There's, bad winters, the weather and all that, the climate, and the fans are pretty similar. Detroit, goodness gracious, Heartbreak City, same thing with Buffalo. Green Bay Packers, yeah, they've been known as Title Town. They've got the history. Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. They've won Super Bowls. They're a historical team. They're a trademark franchise. They're special in their own right with Lambeau and the fact that they're owned by the fans. But and by the way, Wisconsin and Western New York and Central New York, very, very, very similar with their weather patterns and the climates. But on top of that, take out all the winning, and the fan bases are very, very similar. I've seen a game in Green Bay. They act the same as the Bills. They're as passionate fan base as you can get. So there's a lot of relatable things to this division, the Buffalo Bills and Western New York and weather and football and concepts and all this sort of thing. And me being a diehard Bills fan, I relate to the NFC North. I root for these teams. I want them to do well. My man Kevin Rich is a diehard Detroit Lion fan. I have several buddies, close buddies, who are Packer fans. And I don't hate any of these teams. I mean, there's not a team here that's easy to hate. I mean, even with the Rodgers, drama, I don't hate them. I want Green. I root for Green Bay after Buffalo. I root for Green Bay. I want them to win. I rooted for them in the game last year against the Bucks. I want Rodgers to get another Super Bowl because I think he'd be that pantheon man. It would be whew. You pull that curtain back and that first 4 or 5 guys in NFL history, quarterback wise. I don't know if he's there now. I mean, if you listen to Chris Sims thinks he's the best quarterback of all time, and the best quarterback he's ever seen. I don't think that he's on the short list. But, there's a lot I want to see succeed in that division. Let's put it like that. Matthew Coller, unbelievable guest today. Purple Insider here on the ML Sports Platter. Make sure you go subscribe to that terrific website and get him on Twitter at Matthew Coller. And again, pick up his book, Making of a Miracle, Amazon.com online, where books are sold, and your local bookstore as well. The ML Sports Platter is brought to you by your great friends at Stanley Law Offices, CNY Electrical, Hunt Real Estate Agent Heather Saxton, and Camillus Golf Club. Make sure if you're in and around Central New York or around the great state of New York, you travel and go play a brand new golf course. Go play the Shopmakers course. It is Camillus Golf Club. Membership's available now for 2022. Stop by for food and beverage after your round as well. They've got Under Armour polos and hats ready to roll out of the pro shop. Make sure you go see my friends at Camillus Golf Club, the official golf club of the ML Sports Platter. And also a big tip of the cap thank you to Rosie's Corner and the Swan and Whitaker families for their support of the Platter as well. Thanks for listening to the MLSP all over the major platforms. Download, subscribe, leave feedback, and a 5-star review where you get podcasts, and hit me on Twitter as well at Mike L Sports. As I always tell you, enjoy the games.